Ach, Jacob. Your teaching just now on kashrut, which I loved the personal part at the end especially. Your teaching on kashrut is especially timely after this week that we've all had, observing with varying degrees of strictness an extra measure of dietary restraint during Pesach. I also offer a special yasher koach, really, for bringing so much of yourself to that teaching. I think many of us here can relate to the idea of deciding for ourselves which rules are worth following and which are not. But even if that might be how we feel about thinking about which laws we want to follow and which we don't, the Torah itself is actually not willing to be so flexible with us. Before getting to the meticulous laws of eating, this week's Parsha offers up a cautionary tale about what might happen when we don't follow the letter of the law. Parashat Shmini begins with Moses telling Aaron, the high priest, exactly how to offer a sacrifice in all its painstaking, fleshly, kind of grotesque detail. Almost in the same breath as these first instructions, the Torah goes out of its way to describe how the Israelite leadership follows every instruction perfectly. Vaikhu et asher tziva Moshe. They brought the things to sacrifice exactly as Moses had commanded. And again, Moses reiterates, Zeh hadavar asher tziva Adonai ta'asu. This is exactly what God has commanded you to do. The Torah doesn't really need to repeat itself in this way, and Ibn Ezra argues that this is kind of like Moses is saying, I shouldn't have to tell you twice, but I am, because clearly I'm going to need to. And the rest of the chapter tells of Aaron following the letter of the law for a perfect first sacrifice, exactly as written or spoken to him. But then we get an example of what not to do. Leviticus chapter 10. Aaron's sons Nadav and Avihu step forward to offer a sacrifice, this time with their own spin on it. Vayikrevu eish zara asher lo tziva otam. They offered a foreign fire that they had not been commanded to do. Immediately, as happens sort of in the Bible, a fire springs forth and consumes them, and they die. And Moses, instead of offering comforting words to his brother after his nephew's tragic death, simply says, I told you so. In other words, the lesson of the Torah portion seems to be you'd better follow all the laws or else. But you took us in a different direction, Jacob. And not only is your teaching more aligned with the values, I think, of probably everyone in this room, but it's also aligned with where Judaism itself has evolved these last 3 millennia, specifically on this topic. You taught us that strictness is only warranted when it teaches us the importance of ethical behavior. Lest we think that eating our fill or our full, if our fill is the ultimate goal, strictness in eating can remind us that there are values at stake in eating. How we treat the animals that nourish us, how we treat the workers who tend to them and tend to our fields, and so on. And also you experimented in your Devar Torah with what less strictness looks like, how your parents and you make informed choices about what and how you eat, how you focus on the values within our laws, perhaps more than the laws themselves. And though Nadav and Avihu's overreach gets top billing in this parsha, we get another example of your message in this story. Because after all is said and done, the lesson of Nadav and Avihu might not actually be to simply follow all the laws exactly as written all the time. Once Moses chastises Aaron's family for the behavior of these 2 sons, he gives complete instructions for making a meal offering. He doesn't stop to console his nephews or his brother, recognizing the deep grief they were enduring. Instead, he goes right back to the thing he knows best, the nitty-gritty of laws. Specifically, he tells them to prepare the sacrifice in such a way that they can eat part of it and share the food with their family. And as usual, he goes into great painstaking detail about it. But then something weird happens. They refuse to do it. The Torah doesn't make a big fuss about that fact, but if you look closely, that's what happens. They refuse to do exactly as Moses said. They make the sacrifice in such a way that the whole thing is burned up on the altar and they take none of it for themselves. Moses gets flustered. Madua lo achaltem, he says, why didn't you eat? At which point, Aaron stands up to his brother and says, on a day like today, when I've witnessed my son's death, do you think God would have been happy to accept my offering as if nothing had happened? It's kind of a mic drop moment. And the Torah says that Moses accepted his point. Nadav and Avihu might just be the straw men, the foil to the real lesson here, which comes from their father Aaron. Despite receiving a bunch of laws, he's making an assessment the best he can with the heart and the gut he has, and he chooses to do something else. He says, I have to do what feels right to me, and surely my God understands that. It seems like a very reform idea, perhaps, to just do what feels right to you and go with that. But it's right there in the Parsha, echoed later in the book of Proverbs that states, Lev yodea marat nafsho, the heart alone knows its own bitterness. In the Talmud, in Bava Metzia, we get a legal rationale for this, the idea of going beyond the letter of the law, or in Hebrew, lifnim mishurat hadin. This means discerning the spirit of the law and following that, not merely what the text says in black and white. In a Talmudic discussion about why the temple in Jerusalem was destroyed, one reason they give is that the Jews of the time were living by strict observance and not by the spirit of the law. They applied the laws too punctiliously and didn't care about mitigating circumstances or whom it hurt when they behaved so piously. The leadership who cared so deeply about their own piety seemed not to care that the poor of Israel were not able to live out the laws of Israel. They weren't able to live out the laws exactly. Neither were the sick nor the stranger among them. And instead of offering compassion to those groups and their own sacred attempts to live by the spirit of the law, the leadership approached them with a punishing spirit. As Rabbi Yochanan implies, the temple in Jerusalem was destroyed because the leadership did not have the discernment to understand what really mattered, the values inherent in our laws, which ultimately point us toward ethics. This is, of course, a lesson that any of us can get behind. Sometimes we have to use our best judgment and not merely a guidebook when we make decisions. That's among the greatest features of adult life, for better or worse. And Jacob, today you claim that adult responsibility. It's really hard to do this. And we get a hint of that reality in this parsha as well. As Moses describes the role of priests, he says, "U'havdil bein hakodesh uvein hachol," an echo of Havdalah, if you know those blessings. You must discern the sacred from the profane. You have to figure it out. Being a priest, being a leader, being an adult means that you're going to have to figure it out for yourself, how to live true to your values. And that is what you described, Jacob, when it came to making food for asylum seekers and deciding for yourself how to follow the ethical example of our people. This discernment is at the core of what it means to be a Jew in the modern world, a thinking, feeling, and active Jew, and you are well on your way to a lifetime of being exactly that. Tonight, we will come back to those same words from this parsha for Havdalah, to havdil, to separate out. We all do our best to live with a discerning mind and heart, to determine what is holy and what is not, to live lifnim mishurat hadin. We won't always get it right, but to enact this discernment is getting it right. Applying our laws to our ethical values, to color our choices with both the letter and the spirit of the law. Havdalah tonight will end Shabbat, but it won't end your journey of discernment. Now, as a bar mitzvah, responsible for all of this, it will have just begun. Shabbat shalom.